Darkcast Network, the light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
I'm Edward October. Ask any bold individualist and they'll tell you. All you need for a perfect eggnog is to combine egg yolks, beaten until creamy, egg whites, beaten until fluffy, heavy cream, a generous portion of fresh ground nutmeg, and an even more generous portion of liquor. Most people use dark rum. I prefer bourbon. The final two ingredients are essential. A cozy seat by the fire to sip it, and a ghost story, told as only Octoberpod can tell it. This year, Octoberpod's gift to you is a Christmas ghost story that can easily be called a classic of the medium. It drops on December 25th, Christmas Day. Find it on our YouTube channel, Octoberpod Home Video, or on OctoberpodAM, wherever you get podcasts. You can find all of our links at OctoberpodVHS.com. Listen by the fire, and we guarantee it will be the crowning pleasure of your busy holiday season. After all, eggnog without a belt of good hooch is hardly eggnog, and Christmas without an Octoberpod ghost story is hardly Christmas. Octoberpod, Yuletide horror for bold individualists.
Hey, if you haven't figured it out yet, I'm your bad influence with naughty language. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. Welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm your host, CJ. First, a big thank you to CG, who bought me a cup of coffee. Yay! You rock, CG. Second, you can find me on the socials just about everywhere as Rainbow Crimes or Darkcast Network. Third, please consider joining my Patreon at the unicorn level for ad-free early release episodes and one exclusive to Patreon only episode at the end of every month. That's when we take our unicorns out of the stable and go for a ride as I tell you a case that I haven't covered here on the show yet. I think that's all the housekeeping for now. Let's get into this episode's case. Author Robert Jordan once said, "A secret spoken finds wings." This is a pretty profound statement if you think about it. If you have a secret and tell someone, it's already found its first set of wings. More sets of wings grow on that secret if the person you told the secret to shares it with someone else. Or if you keep telling your secret to others. You get the idea. This story is about a man married to a woman, and he has numerous sexual encounters outside his marriage. His so-called secret affairs, they grew wings. 49-year-old Brian Hancock was an electrician from National City, which is nestled in San Diego County, California. Brian had a wife and 2 young daughters, but he also had a nasty recreational drug habit. In 2017, 68-year-old Peter Bentz, who lived in Ocean Beach, which is also in San Diego County, hired Brian to do some electrical contract work for him. The two found that they had more in common than the electrical work that needed to be done. Peter was a gay man, and he also had a recreational drug habit. The two men would do drugs together and engage in consensual sex together on a regular basis for several months. About a week before Thanksgiving in 2017, Brian stopped by Peter's apartment with his secret girlfriend, Rosa. The three smoked some meth, and after they were high, Brian and Peter had sex on the couch while Rosa watched. Then Brian and Rosa had sex on the couch while Peter watched. When the sex was done, Peter excused himself to the bathroom. Brian took that opportunity to help himself to a credit card in Peter's wallet. Brian and Rosa left Peter's apartment, and being the big spender he was with a stolen credit card, Brian took Rosa out for a classy dinner at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Woo! That night Rosa, who by the way had a boyfriend that wasn't Brian, was playing around on her Facebook account. She received an anonymous message that people would be surprised by a video of her and a link to click. Rosa, who was with her other boyfriend at the time, couldn't open and view the video sent. She got very upset and she texted Brian. She thought Peter had filmed her and Brian having sex, and she was scared that her boyfriend would find out about her affair with Brian. Brian told her not to worry, he'd take care of it. Brian had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with Rosa for about 10 years. They started seeing each other. It was during the first pregnancy of Brian's wife. His wife Angelina found out about the affair and divorced Brian. He also had told Angelina he was bisexual. Angelina could handle his extramarital romps with men, but not with other women. A year or so later, Brian won Angelina back, and they married again after he promised it was over with Rosa. But then Brian became antsy again in his marriage, and he looked Rosa up on Facebook, and they rekindled their fling in spite of Rosa's boyfriend. Okay, back to the supposed video Peter took of Brian and Rosa. These two are idiots. I've gotten messages on social media like this before, about a video of me. Click the link, you'll be surprised, and so will everybody else. And probably some of you have gotten this too. It's a scam. It's best to just ignore it and delete. But now Rosa and Brian were worked up thinking Peter filmed them having sex. For several days they discussed the possible videotape and the link Rosa was sent, until Brian was ready to make his move. On November 21st, 2017, Brian DM'd Peter on Facebook, and he asked if he could swing by. Peter always graciously welcomed anyone to come over and hang out, so he was all, sure. Prior to going over to Peter's apartment, Brian went by his drug dealer's place. His drug dealer was a woman named Tori, whom Brian considered a friend, and he also had sexual relations with her. Brian would go on to tell Tori about an alleged sex tape of him and Rosa that Peter had videotaped. He also told Tori he was going to kill Peter. Tori figured he was just blowing steam. Brian arrived at Peter's apartment, and this would be the last day anyone saw Peter alive. Brian's cell phone records showed him in the vicinity of Peter's apartment around 3:15 p.m. Brian called his wife after 3:15 that afternoon. He called her around 10 times, and he sounded scared and panicked. She would later testify to this at his trial. She said Brian never sounded like that in all the 20 years they'd been married. She said he came home briefly around 7 p.m., and he looked frightened. His eyes were wide, he was sweaty. He looked like he was really stressed out. He told her his truck brakes weren't working, and he was going to take her car. But then he returned back home and asked if she would drop him off at Walmart, which she did. In the early hours of the next morning, the day before Thanksgiving, Brian used Peter's credit card at Walmart and Smart & Final, which if you've never been to a Smart & Final, it's like a mini warehouse type store. You can buy things in bulk. Between the two stores with Peter's stolen credit card, he purchased a new cell phone, and he registered it using his middle name of Eleron as his last name. He also purchased some cleaning supplies. And then he went to Peter's apartment. He also took Peter's SUV. Later that day, Brian spoke again to Tori. He told her he stabbed Peter 7 times. He also said, Peter's a big guy, it was hard to take him down. He asked Tori to come over to Peter's apartment and keep watch while he cleaned. Tori said there was no fucking way she was getting involved in any of that. So he called Rosa to ask if she would, but Rosa wouldn't answer Brian's calls. Brian cleaned up and he hoped no one was planning to drop by Peter's apartment while he was there. Brian called his wife again and he asked her to go buy some cardboard boxes for him. He said he wanted to change out the boxes they stored their Christmas items in. Angelina did what Brian requested. He went home briefly to pick up the boxes. Angelina never saw the boxes again. Brian, the big blabbermouth he was, he also told another friend about Peter's alleged sex tape of him and Rosa. Brian told that friend he put Peter on a vacation. Brian arrived to his home again late in the morning on Thanksgiving Day 2017. He spent several hours enjoying food in the company of his wife and daughters. Later in the afternoon, he asked his wife to follow him to a friend's place so he could return the SUV he borrowed. He told her to drive around the neighborhood for a bit, and he'd text her when he was ready to be picked up. She once again did what he asked, but she soon tired of waiting. She pulled into a little strip mall, and she saw the SUV her husband had been driving. He was at the back of the vehicle with the hatch up. It looked like he was stuffing something into a plastic shopping bag. He slammed down the hatch of the SUV, and he got into his wife's car with the plastic bag. The couple started driving home, and Brian made Angelina take back roads. She finally asked him what was going on, and he told her he accidentally killed his friend Peter Bentz. He then told her to stop the car. He got out and he threw the plastic bag over a chain-link fence and rejoined his wife in the car. Angelina, realizing the SUV was Peter's, started to freak out that she would be considered an accomplice to murder. Brian confirmed that yes, the SUV was Peter's, and the contents of the bag contained Peter's wallet and some other things. He also admitted to her that he was going to try to put Peter's body in the boxes that she bought for him to carry out. Brian thought it would be easier on his bad back. Later Thanksgiving night, Brian had his wife call a friend. He wanted her to ask if the friend would loan them an SUV for a couple of days. Brian took off in the loaned vehicle, and he didn't return that night. The next day, which was only the busiest shopping day of the year, that's right, Black Friday, Brian went to Home Depot, and using Peter's credit card, he purchased a table saw, a shovel, a rug, a pickaxe, weatherproof gloves, and a hand truck. About 3:30 p.m., cell phone records show Brian heading south of San Diego to Campo, California. Campo is on the California-Mexican border. He didn't leave Campo until about 9 p.m. When he got home, Angelina noticed Brian washing blood and matted hair off of his legs. The next afternoon, Brian had Angelina drive him where he left Peter's SUV in the strip mall. She followed him as he parked it in another parking lot in Mira Mesa, which is also a suburb in San Diego County. After that task had been done, Brian and Angelina took their daughters out for ice cream. During his week-long crime spree over Thanksgiving week, Brian not just cleaned up Peter's apartment, but he cleaned out Peter's apartment. He took a chess set, china dishes, a stamp collection, a cedar chest, some men's jewelry, a computer, and of course all Peter's video equipment. He also took a ring from Peter, which he buried in his backyard for the time being. It was an Army-class ring that Peter had earned from his time serving in the military. Later, Brian would dig it back up and decide to try and pawn it with the other items he swiped from Peter's apartment. Brian and Angelina cleaned the SUV they borrowed, and they returned it to their friend. And Brian had Angelina wipe all the messages between the two of them off her phone. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe that even if you erase messages, you still have made a digital footprint that can be retrieved somehow. Peter's brother started to get very worried about Peter. Peter didn't show up for their traditional Thanksgiving dinner. He also wasn't answering his phone calls or text messages. On December 4th, about 2 weeks after Peter's murder, his brother called San Diego police and reported him missing. Peter and his brother shared a family cell phone plan, and that allowed Peter's brother to access Peter's phone record. Peter had no cell phone activity since November 21st, 2017. The brother and his wife started calling numbers listed on Peter's phone record in hopes of finding someone who knew what happened to him. They got a hold of Brian, and Brian claimed he and Peter texted the day before Thanksgiving, but he hadn't seen him. December 7th, 3 days after the missing persons report was filed, police made a welfare check to Peter's apartment. As far as they could tell, nothing inside looked disturbed. It appeared very clean, so the officers left. December 12th, Peter's SUV was found in a parking lot by police in Mira Mesa where Brian had left it. The SUV appeared very clean inside as well, aside from a milky white substance on the dash. I'm gonna confirm it now. The milky white substance was a chemical cleaner, not what your dirty minds are all thinking it was. Shame on you. You're my peeps. On December 14th, a homicide unit was checking license plate readers for Peter's plate in San Diego County. They had a hit at the strip mall that Brian had originally parked Peter's SUV at. When the unit went to the location, they found cleaning wipes, a cleaner that was milky white on the sidewalk, and about a block from the strip mall, they found the plastic shopping bag that contained Peter's wallet, his Veterans Affair card, and rental receipts. Near the bag was Peter's cell phone and some crumpled paper towels with blood smears. Again, detectives went back to Peter's apartment. They decided a murder had taken place here and was cleaned up very well. Moving aside some of the big pieces of furniture and throw rugs, they were able to see a huge saturation stain on the carpet. These occur when a victim bleeds out. Detectives, now, I don't credit law enforcement much on this podcast, but these detectives seem to do a pretty good job with this case. They began looking into Peter's social network accounts and his phone records. They found a plethora of messages from Brian, and this put Brian at the top of their suspect list. There was even talk about a sex videotape, and that he would be dropping by Peter's place November 21st. Brian was brought to the police station for questioning, and he was asked to submit to a DNA swab. An expert was able to determine, first off, the mass blood on the carpet was Peter's. DNA from Peter and Brian were found on a knife in the kitchen, and Brian's DNA was found in the kitchen sink, on cleaning supplies, and on door handles. While this is just circumstantial evidence at the moment, it gets much worse for Brian. Detectives followed Peter's phone pings and Brian's phone pings simultaneously to Brian and Angelina's house, and then Brian's phone pings to Campo, California. A homicide unit went out to Campo, and cadaver dogs went to explore. They found a path that led to a hole 2 by 4 feet in diameter, not really big enough to bury a large man. They also found a hatchet, a tag to a new pickaxe, and a plastic spray bottle. While exploring, there was a horrendous odor wafting about, but the cadaver dogs didn't hit on anything. The dogs did alert to the tailgate of Peter's SUV and 2 spots in Brian's backyard. Brian was arrested on January 23, 2018. He also testified on his own behalf at trial, which most defense attorneys strongly try to dissuade their clients from doing. But Brian, who we already know wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, took the stand. He told the jury he injured his back and he couldn't work, and he turned to meth as a way to relieve his pain. He said he had met Peter when Peter was looking for someone to fix a ceiling fan in his apartment, and then Peter called him back for another electrical-related job. And that's when their relationship turned sexual. Brian would hook up with Peter every week at least once, and in addition to sex, they'd smoke pot, do meth, and heroin together. Brian went on to say that he went over to Peter's to ask him about a video of him and Rosa, which Peter denied ever making, and that he, Brian, believed Peter. Incidentally, there was no sex tape. Peter never filmed them. Then on the 22nd of November, he dropped by Peter's apartment, and Peter was filming 3 men having sex. He offered Brian $3,000 to join in, and Brian did. He said he left around 7 p.m. because his wife and kids were expecting him. So, what Brian is doing here is he's changing the timeline. He then stated he saw Peter on the 22nd, the 24th, and the 26th. He said Peter decided not to go to his brother's for Thanksgiving because he didn't want his brother to see he was back to using drugs. So Peter and one of the guys he was filming were going to Mexico, and they were leaving the 27th or the 28th of November. Right, Brian. Angelina divorced Brian's ass a second time, and she testified against him in court. His drug dealer Tori also testified against Brian. as did several friends he told his secrets to. Brian was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 75 years to life. Rest in power, Peter. Our true crime quickie comes to us from Washington, D.C. It's a cold case from 1987 that's been heating up a little as of October and November of this year. A 35-year-old lesbian named Greta Rainey was savagely raped and murdered in her girlfriend's apartment on Capitol Hill in broad daylight. Incidentally, 18 months prior to Greta's murder, in the same apartment complex, a 23-year-old woman was also raped and murdered. Both Greta and the 23-year-old woman were paralegals. 2 days after Greta's body was found, police arrested and charged 32-year-old Roxanne Johnson. Roxanne was Greta's girlfriend. They arrested and charged Roxanne with second-degree murder, even though Roxanne was at work at the time of the murder. As well, the method of operation into the killings of both women in the apartment complex was exactly the same. Both had been raped and strangled. I'm curious if the 1987 police thought Roxanne murdered the 23-year-old also. And did she rape both of the women? I don't think Roxanne had sperm. The way the detectives in D.C. were thinking just doesn't make any sense to me. Roxanne maintained her innocence throughout the investigation, but police were set she was the guilty party in killing Greta. Greta had stayed the night with Roxanne on May 12th. The next morning, Roxanne had to go to work, and Greta was still in her apartment, and she was fine when Roxanne left. A little later in the morning, Roxanne had called Greta repeatedly, but Greta never picked up. Roxanne was confused as to why she wasn't picking up her phone, so she asked a coworker to go with her to the apartment, and that's when Greta's body was found. Roxanne was arraigned, however, I don't think it ever went to trial, but it did uproot Roxanne's life. She was even told to move out of the apartment complex. Just in October of this year, finally, DNA and rape kits from both women murdered in the complex came to light. Roxanne's name was cleared, and investigators say they now know for sure that the killer of the two women are the same person because DNA from both bodies that didn't belong to the victims matched. They were also able to say they're now confident the killer is a male, and they are nearly positive he is black, which still doesn't narrow things down that much, but it's more than they had 35 years ago, and more information keeps getting reported, which is wonderful. Now they just need to find the guy. Currently, investigators are looking into if the DNA they have matches any database that people use for genealogy research. Hopefully, they can find the true killer and close these cold cases. Rest in power, Greta. Love you, Rainbow Warriors. And remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.